I was somewhat surprised, and I've got no reason to question or doubt the words of Rick when he spoke, but I was somewhat surprised to hear that property officers had given some signal to the new owners of the caravan park, because that was one of my concerns, that you buy into a business that only has a 2-year or 2 or 3 years of your lease left to run, and without undertaking due diligence and getting some reassurance that you would have a lease going forward. And I was somewhat surprised that we had not been approached as a council, and I do bear in mind that I had no positions in the last council, so maybe I was somewhat out of the loop, but I was somewhat surprised to hear that there had been approaches to the council, and if there were, well, certainly I was not aware of them. So that was somewhat surprising, because I was very much of the mind that anybody buying into a property that that a clear steer in the previous 8 years had been given that land would be reverting back to public space, that somebody would invest into that property. I think we all value our open space, and I hark back to when Mayor Hartley, in her first term of council, and I think Member O'Connor was on council at that time, purchased the beachfront land, the land adjacent to the Strand. At that time there was a huge huge lambasting of that council. Most of them lost their seats, and yet now, how many of us put our hand on our heart and say it was a dumb decision? I think if anybody suggests that that land should be sold or be given away or be used for some form of commercial space, then there would be a huge uproar in the community. One of the things that I felt strongly about is that flat open space near the beaches is very, very important. I look at Narrow Neck and just how heavily used that area is. The flat open space is hugely valued, and we are getting lots of busloads coming down there, which I think is fantastic, from groups that often don't have the privilege of living near a beach like we do. So that's something that I felt was very, very important. I think there was a lot of misinformation, and I'm not saying it was spread intentionally. There was a lot of misinformation about what the community hub was promoting or was suggesting. I've been told by a number of people that there was going to be boats all over the area. The boats that are normally all over the area are when there has been an event at the Takapuna Boating Club, and I must say they run very good events, and they also always apply for resource consents, temporary uses of those reserves. And while you do get a little bit of clutter, I think often when those big events are being run, the public at large, particularly our local community, is actually very keen on actively watching. So that was one of the things I think that there has been a lot of or confusion in the community about. There was also a lot of confusion about the fact that there would be a lot of activity in moving boats and there would be a lot of clutter. We heard very clearly during the management plan process that would not be the case, that most of the boats would be smaller boats drawn by hand carts, and I think we heard that tonight once again. Community space, I'm sure, would be activated and used by kayaks and canoes. I also heard from a lady who was elderly by her definition, who told me she wanted the holiday park to remain, as she didn't want the reserve used for commercial gain or commercial space or personal gain. And I did explain to her that that wasn't the situation, that it has been, ever since it has been a holiday park, it has provided a commercial return. I've also heard from a couple of people that I don't know whether they did put in submissions. I certainly got the impression that they did, that they had put in submissions, but subsequently had seen what was proposed, the green roof, and were very, very keen on that. Looking at the green roof, that was another thing I felt was a very good opportunity for the community, in that particularly for the disabled and the infirm, because it would provide a fantastic viewing platform. And having a mother that's in a wheelchair, I can certainly agree that it's very difficult sometimes for them to get good viewing positions from places to view our wonderful Hauraki Gulf. I think it's important, Mr Chair, tonight we'll go on and we'll have a reassess this situation. We'll be getting some reports, and obviously the issue's not going to go away. We're going to be facing some decisions in the future as to what is the outcome, as to whether the caravan park remains or whether there is more support for the hub. One of the things I do have some reservation about is asking the council officers to work with the group to find an alternative location, because I think they have already been tasked with that, and I think that was addressed also earlier on today. So I'm not sure whether the opportunity to have something, if it is not to be on that reserve, and that may be the situation, if that is not going to be on the reserve, I doubt that it will be within our area. I'm most certainly not a yachty. I've never yachted, but I certainly get a lot of pleasure seeing kids transition from waterwise through and onto our great shore-based clubs, and frequently obtaining recognition on the world stage. And so for one of those reasons, like Member Cohen, I would really like to see a hub in place in some location. Whether it is to be down here or not will be for a future decision. One of the things I do hark back to is the late Judge Brown, who is well known for his quote, and I can certainly ascertain that this is more often the case: a kid in sport is a kid out of court. And just putting my other hat on, that is certainly often the situation. Just a couple of further little notes. Just ironically, we and as up until recently, the leader or the portfolio holder for the events portfolio, and Member Gillen is my alternate, we've become increasingly challenged with the events that are demanding more commercial use on our reserves, and we have been trying to push back and minimise that impact, and it has been difficult. There has been a couple of opportunities declined for that reason, and so I think we've also got to balance and take that into consideration going forward. So, Mr Chair, I'll certainly support the motion as it is. As I say, probably it's just adding to the angst for all parties in the room, because it's going to mean further dialogue, further information sought, and before it comes back to this board for a ultimate decision.
Okay, thank you, Member Hale. So with all members speaking, I will quickly use my right of reply just to say that I appreciate the work that Member Gillen has put into getting the resolutions amended to this stage, because essentially that is what we're doing now. We're saying, as a point of fairness, we need to see what realistically the options are in tangible applications for the northern end. And it's a shame, I guess, because that was the direction that we set for the working party, and we didn't quite get there in terms of developing a management plan, a concept plan to give greater effect to the words of the management plan, which is what a concept plan is supposed to do. It's supposed to provide pictures to the words. And so, yes, with these recommendations as they are, we're asking for reports to come back to the board on the processes required to, one, and I just want to clarify the reasons why, to end the current occupation potentially of operators that have continued on a month-by-month arrangement until their lease ended. And I think it's just because we need to be clear that if we do move forward with the option of a campground or some altered temporary accommodation, self-contained motorhome facility, whatever it might be at the northern end, it needs to go for a public open tender. The reality is there needs to be a competitive process that we go through, and no preference can be granted to the current operators. It needs to be an open suggestion of what anyone in the market would suggest you could use in that space. And I think that's just fair process. It's a tendering process that we should undertake. We've continued this temporary arrangement of month-by-month arrangements now for almost 2 years. In reality, we need to be able to provide greater certainty over what's going to happen there, and it can't be on a month-by-month arrangement. In order to do that, we need to have the courage to know that the proposal that we have is robust enough and widely enough tested that it essentially has at least been market tested. So that's one aspect that hopefully we can receive from ACPL. The second aspect to what we're seeing on the table today is that we need to look at alternative sites. I believe that most of that work has been done, but there's no harm in us taking another look at the research and the studies that have been conducted. And then there's also just the feedback, the amendments added in by Member Gillen, that we need to be able to look at what the process is, recognising that there has been this feedback result, recognising that there is now a process involved under the Reserves Act and under whatever processes we require. We need to know what can be done in that setting. This report does not, as I said, does not constitute landowner consent, does not constitute resource consent, so we need to know what needs to be done to undertake that exercise. And although it probably means another round of public notification based on what the legal advice suggestion was there, the board needs to be fully informed specifically on what that is, and obviously more details need to be provided to Nicolette for that. So although it's not an ideal situation, I think at the very least we're providing the opportunity for this all to be considered when the facts are put in front of the board. So with that, my speaking turn is completed, and I would like to put the motion. Do members want to have it collectively or individually?
Individually.
Divisions and on each individual?
Each one.
Okay. So, Mr. Perry?
Through you, Mr. Chair, if we could see the substantive motions from the outset. Obviously, with leave of the mover and the seconder, we've suggested a few amendments to try to tidy the wording up in the order. So in particular, we're suggesting that Resolution B, which is basically noting that if the board wants to pursue a particular option, you need more information. We're doing that, so it's a bit redundant. So if we scroll down, what we have done is also tried to combine where the board has requested, well, particular reports. So if you read Resolution J, that references the requests for further information around the information from ACPL around the campground lease, and then Resolution H around progressing retention of the campground. So ideally, we will try to report that all collectively rather than individually. So we have suggested some liberties in terms of ordering and removal of a particular resolution for clarity, but I don't believe we've done anything to change the intent. So I just want to point that out before we start voting on anything.
Okay, I'm comfortable with those changes. Member Hale, are you? So, Member O'Connor, you had a question?
Yeah, I was questioning, well, I don't know what number it is, on the old one, it's E. Note that there's currently, no, it must be the next one down about the lease. Why we need that? We know that it's a 6 month, month by month lease, and we have to give 6 months notice of termination. So why are we requesting that about the campground lease?
I don't think Mr. Perry can respond. But
We've got to give it 6 months for notice, and so why are we wasting our time redoing it?
Mr. Perry?
Through you, Mr. Chair, what we don't know is what the implications are to the board, to the organization, to the campground operator around terminating the lease. Don't understand the costs, the timeline, whether there are any lease conditions that put a financial burden on a particular party.
There's no lease. He's a lease. This is fine.
No, but the process of potentially making good the land could have some financial implications that before the board actually makes a decision on what it wants to do there, I think it's more than prudent to request that information so you have all the facts to hand before you take any particular course of action.
Okay, so with that in mind, we'll move through the paragraphs A through to, I'm not sure what the final letter is now, N, K. So on the first one, I'll put the motion. As
You have to go slowly because you've changed all the numbers.
Sure, fair enough.
So go right back to the beginning.
So the first motion, which is receive the analysis of the feedback received during consultation on options for use of the Northern Reserve of Takapuna Beach. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favour say aye. Contrary, carried. The second, note that the board... note the board's concern over how the informal feedback process has been influenced by interest groups on all sides and the impact that this has had on the outcome. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favour? Division? Division? Yep. So,
Someone with experience.
By division, Member Cohen?
Are we doing on an alphabetical?
I'm just reading down the list, sorry. It's
I'm against that.
Member Gillen? No. Member Hale? Member O'Connor?
No.
Member Rowe?
4.
Mr. Chair?
4.
Double vote.
I use my casting vote accordingly.
Double vote.
So that's C. Note the analysis of open-ended comments revealed the underlying motivation that many of the respondents, regardless of the option that they, regardless of the option that they selected as their first or second preference, was around ensuring as many individuals as possible have access to and are able to get the best use out of the northern end of the Takapuna Beach Reserve. Those in favour say aye. Division.
Member Cohen?
No.
Member Gillen?
No.
Member Hale? Member O'Connor?
No.
Member Rowe?
No.
Member Bergen?
For.
Mr. Chair. Fails 4-2.
Okay. Item C, isn't it? No? Oh, sorry, that we're up to D. Request Auckland Council Property Limited begin discussions with the operators of the Takapuna Beach Holiday Park to report back to the board, and report back to the board on the process to give notice to vacate the land and make good the land currently occupied on the northern reserve of the Takapuna Beach as soon as practicable, noting the prior commitment of the board to grant 6 months' notice, at least that should say, to grant at least 6 months' notice in the event the lease is terminated. Division has been called for.
Apologies. Division. Oh, sorry. Member Cohen?
No.
Member Gillen?
No.
Member Hale?
No.
Member O'Connor?
No.
Member Rowe?
No.
Mr. Chair.
4.
Fails.
E. Note that there is currently a publicly notified resource consent application being processed for the Northern Reserve in the name of the Harbour Access Trust, and that the board will make no further decision relating to the occupation of the Northern Reserve until the decision of the hearings panel has been made is public.
Division.
Division has been called for.
Member Cohen?
No.
Member Gillen?
No.
Member Hale?
4.
Member O'Connor?
No.
Member Rowe?
4.
Mr. Chair.
4.
Casting vote?
Yes.
Gets through casting vote.
It's yes. No, it's
One.
carried.
It's carried. Apologies.
Using the chair's casting vote. The next one acknowledges that 80% of submitters chose the retention of the Takapuna Beach Holiday Park with upgrades. Option 2, retain the Takapuna Beach Holiday Park with upgrades as their first preference. I don't think we need a division for this one.
No.
Those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Contrary? Carried.